when you read Parenti's Inventing Reality, it makes perfect sense when he describes it the way news outlets and even entertainment media, especially entertainment media, tailor their coverage to what advertisers want. Right? If you start if CNN notices some things that are wonky with COVID and the way the vaccine's being rolled out, and they publish something skeptical, well, guess what? Their main advertiser is Pfizer. Who's not going to advertise with them? Pfizer. What's that going to do? The shareholders and owners at CNN are going to have their surplus value decreased because they're getting less
Mm.
advertising. What do capitalists hate more than anything else? Their profit and their surplus value decreasing. We all know this is a fact of life under capitalism. Nobody, the most conservative person, well, maybe like the Koch brothers, but pretty much nobody would disagree that capitalists put profit before anything. So of course they're not gonna publish things that hurt their advertisers or that reflect negatively on their advertisers. And capitalism has been developing for hundreds of years at this point. So most of the major movie studios, most of the major outlets, most of the major networks have censorship boards. They literally have boards where movies and art and news reports are submitted to, and they check them to make sure they're ideologically in line, right? And you can call that a conspiracy if you want. It's not. It's the reality, right? You can look these up. The networks have these boards, and it's because over time they've developed ways to keep their product ideologically in line with what the ruling class wants, so they don't encounter problems, so they don't encounter resistance, and they can continue to just appropriate surplus value. So it's not a conspiracy. It's very obvious. The people who rule the world and who rule America especially are the people who own capital. Their interests are relatively similar, and they're going to put their interests above anything else and push an ideology that helps further their interests.
Absolutely right, brother. Thank you so much to the comrade Starback for the $10 or €10 super chat. Thank you so much, brother. Yeah, fair points. But do you condemn Hamas?
Hamas.
That's hilarious. I wanted to pull up this video of Eddie saying something, joking with this thing.
Being killed. But more importantly, do you condemn Hamas? You're not allowed to talk about Israel unless you condemn Hamas.
It's so dumb, but it's gold. But when you were going at it there, Eddie, talking about the entertainment media, that functions as a really good segue to our next segment, and the fact that the actress Melissa Barrera was fired by the Scream movie series. I think they're up to like Scream 7. I mean, how many movies can you do of the same like fucking?
No shit. They weren't even that good in the first place. Like, who is that big of a Scream fan?
The scary movie version of Scream was better than Scream itself.
Honestly.
But Melissa Barrera fired because of her pro-Palestine statements, anti-genocide statements, really. So let's give it a watch. You were breaking down the story. Let's give that a watch and then react to some connected stories on the topic.
Actress Melissa Barrera has been dropped from the new Scream movie simply for making social media posts in favor of Palestine. And this reminds me of the time that George Lucas said there was more freedom in the Soviet Union's film industry than there is in America's. This is how ideological control is enforced in Hollywood. If you don't go along with the mainstream media narratives, you won't find work. And in that way, they use celebrities and movies to brainwash us from the top down. The idea that we have free speech in this country is laughable. We're one of the most ideologically controlled countries on the planet. They're not letting any pro-Palestinian voices into the entertainment media or the news media. Solidarity with this actress, the people who fired her are pure scum.
Absolutely. And it shows the control that they have over all institutions. Over, the institutions of the news, the so-called objective institutions, and the entertainment ones. And it's all interconnected to everything else. So it'd be foolish to think that if the empire has its interest set on combating communism, that it's not going to do, the communist raids of Hollywood that it did shortly after the end of the Second World War, during the beginning of the Cold War. If the empire has its eyes set on genociding the Palestinian people as cleverly as it can without losing, the public the public in the information war, at least not too badly. If that's what their eyes are set on, then they're not going to be letting actresses who have influence on the people comment. They're not going to let them comment favorably on Palestine. And what this does is, it's not just fire Melissa, but it sends a message to other actors who might be scrolling through Twitter and Instagram and seeing the tragic situation that the Palestinian people are in, and might feel like using their outlets that can reach millions of people to communicate the fact that there's a genocide going on and that we can stop it if we organize against it. So it's a message that is sent to other actors, so that the ones that are cowardly enough not to speak up decide to not speak up because they don't want to lose their job.
Right. We were just talking about how the entertainment media is so tightly ideologically controlled. This is another example. Like, you speak out against the wrong things and you're fired. And there's been a lot of talk about this in comedy recently in relation to guys like Kevin Hart. And they've basically been getting criticized for selling their soul, because these other comedians are like, you don't get that big in Hollywood unless you will toe the line, refuse to say anything that offends them, and push what they want ideologically, which at the end of the day is neoliberal economics and neoliberal politics. So these free speech conversations that you have with people in America are so insane. They talk about how they support free speech and they want freedom of speech, but, movie studios should be allowed to censor people because they're private. They're privately owned. Guys, everything in the country is privately owned. Everything in the country is owned by some shareholder on Wall Street who you've never met in your life. Everything is owned. Just because it's privately owned doesn't mean it's owned by your neighbor. Doesn't mean it's owned by your mom or your dad or your brother or your sister. It's owned by some giant conglomerate. It's owned by some corporate shareholder who's got more wealth than you can ever even comprehend. And they are firing anybody who tells the truth. And they're doing this in the entertainment media. And of course, they're doing this in the news media, right? Where they actually report on politics. Of course, they're not going to let a political journalist get on who's actually telling you the truth about U.S. imperialism and about capitalism. So, of course, there's going to be censorship under the system. So to claim that, us talking about censorship is conspiracy theory because, these interests don't align. No, they absolutely align. The interests of capital owners have aligned for a long time, and they've controlled the information supply for a long time. They've actually become very good at filtering out information to make sure that the truth doesn't get out. And it's becoming harder for them because of institutes like this and because of social media and other developments, but they're very good at censoring people. And it's almost always the private sector driving the censorship, right? So this idea that we should just accept infringements on our constitutional right to freedom of speech because the people censoring us are from the private sector. Who gives a shit if they're from the private sector? The most powerful people in the country are from the private sector. The government, the public sector that you hate so much, is so bad because it's controlled by the private sector, because it's controlled by the capitalists. So I don't know. I just think that's absurd when people say I'm for freedom of speech, but the private sector should be able to censor us. No, the private sector is the one driving the censorship in this country.
Right, and part of the reason why the censorship works is that we are socialized. We are made into individuals. We become who we are in these societies that have generationally had this same form of thinking that just ends up getting adjusted to the specific things that are required of the era that one is living in. So we already have the assumptions. We're socialized to have the assumptions and the worldview of the media that's feeding us these lies. And that's what makes it really difficult to break through it. But a lot more young people are breaking through that. And it becomes easier to break through that in a society where you realize that you have a futureless future in front of you, where you're crippled by debt because, God forbid, you want to get an education, or God forbid you get sick or want to own a home, where you realize that regardless of whatever job you get, even if you have a 4-year degree, it's going to be a struggle at the end of the month to pay bills, to pay for the necessaries of life. It's a lot easier under those circumstances becoming constant in your life to be like, are the people that are keeping me in these conditions, are they telling me the truth about X, Y, or Z? And eventually, as soon as it breaks in one era, in one space, in one event, it'll break in all the other ones, and it becomes a lot easier for one to question the whole system. So, that's another part of it, right? This news also expects us to have been socialized and to have come to accept the worldviews that also presuppose the news that these stations are putting out. Um, in connection, by the way, to what we were talking about, Jenny Ortega, who I think is a little bit more of a recognized
Jenna.
artist. Jenna. Oh, I thought it was Jenny the whole time. I haven't
Well,
seen
I'm in love
Wednesday.
with her, so I would know.
I haven't seen Wednesday. I haven't seen any of her work. I just know that she became a meme. There was a meme of her a while back where she's like, it was the structure of the meme was like they ask her what book she's reading, and then people were like, "The Communist Manifesto, Capital, Hegel's Signs of Logic," or something. And I think I got to know her because of the meme, and I think my wife saw Wednesday. I didn't get to see it. But she's part of this Scream franchise, and after they fired Melissa, she also quit in solidarity with her. So that's an extremely courageous action. You know, there's I'm sure a lot of money that was left on the table there in order to stand by her principles. We just saw something similar. The agency that Susan Sarandon was signed to, they fired her because of the positions that she's taken against the genocide of the Palestinian people. So these artists or influencers have a lot to lose when they speak truth to power, and it's beautiful to see when some of them have the courage to do so. And even if they get reprimanded, they take it on the chin and they keep moving forward, having the sort of honor of knowing that they stood on the right side of history and that the people that fired them stood with the forces that hate humanity, that destroy humanity, and that are carrying forth one of the most heinous things that humanity can do, which is a genocide.
Yeah, I think that basically sums up the tweet I put out. Like the people who have been fired for standing up for Palestine, they're heroes and they'll be remembered that way historically. You know, just like we look at people who stood up against Nazi Germany, like the communists who fought against Nazism and fascism from the early days, right? Not even from post rise to power, but as it was coming to power, they recognized it for what it was and attacked it. We look back upon those people as heroes, people like Antonio Gramsci, right? Same thing. People like Jenna Ortega are standing up against fascism, and they're being fired by the ruling class for standing up against a fascist genocide. And hopefully, historically, we look back at this the same way. We look back at these scumbags running the movie studios the same way that we look back at William Randolph Hearst, who was aiding and doing propaganda for the Nazis, who was a big fan of Hitler, even though he owned, and owned a large number of the newspapers here in the United States. Right? Israel is a fascist state. Make no mistake about it. Like I said at the beginning of the stream, they have propaganda to trick you into thinking they're not a fascist state, just like every fascist state does, but they are. And everybody who's cheering on their genocide right now, the Sacha Baron Cohens of the world, history will not look back on them fondly.
Absolutely, and I went into a little rant about this last stream towards the end, but for people that call themselves Marxists, this understanding of fascism, it needs to be a little bit more refined. At least from what I see from a lot of the people that I engage with, that have the hammer and sickle in their bio, they're approaching the question of fascism from a very idealist point of view. So if you're in favor or present yourself as in favor of like LGBTQ rights, as Israel does, how do you call them fascist? If they're pro LGBTQ and fascism is the conservatives that are against all these things going on now. So that's a very idealist understanding of what fascism is. We need to have a materialist, a specifically historical materialist understanding of what fascism is, and see fascism as the form that capitalism takes, specifically capitalist imperialism takes in periods of crisis, when either one, there's the threat of the working class making significant advances, or a revolutionary break with the existing order, or two, regardless of where the working class is, there's a very significant drop in the rate of profits, as there was in Italy, that makes it viable for the capitalist class, whether the new monies or the old aristocratic monies, to fund the fascist movement so that it can repress and tear back all of the gains that the working class or that oppressed communities were able to make in the periods before the fascist takeover. So that requires a materialist analysis of fascism. And when you have that, you see that it's extremely clear that Israel is a fascist state, regardless of all these other connections that you have between some of the early Zionists and the Nazis. Like, study the political economy of Israel, and it becomes evident, that it's a fascist state. The Starback, thank you so much, brother, for the
same with Ukraine, by the way. Sorry, I just have to add that because the similarities between Israel and Ukraine are so out in the open and obvious. That is what a fascist state looks like. But.
Are you saying that the anarchists who were comparing Ukraine to Palestine were wrong?
I haven't even seen anyone make that comparison, but I know in my head that it exists, that those people are out there.
There was anarchists going to fight in Ukraine at the beginning of it. Those brigades of like Reddit American anarchists going to Ukraine to fight because they were drawing this comparison of Ukraine being like Palestine fighting against the invaders and the occupiers.
Wow.
All the while, they're saying that they're going to turn Ukraine into like another Israel.
It's almost unbelievable because like I've never met an anarchist who's that dedicated. Like, I can't believe that exists.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, brother Starback, for another €5 super chat. California schools must now teach how to recognize fake news through media literacy lessons in English, science, math, and history at every grade level. So if they were actually teaching that, if they were actually teaching critical thinking, that would be excellent. But what they're going to teach is how people who are indoctrinated by the dominant form of ideology can be manipulated to a point where when they see alternative media, they consider that to be propaganda and fake news. What they're going to probably teach is how is it that we can manipulate people to a point that when they turn on Midwestern Marx, when they turn on Telesur, RT, Press TV, CG, TN, all these other alternative medias, Al Jazeera, how can we have these sort of instant reactions developed in them such that when they see these claims, they're like, oh, these people are anti-Semitic, or oh, these people are Putin propagandists. So I think if we consider, what these schools represent, which are like what the church was during the feudal era is what schools are now. Schools are like the centers of the development of bourgeois ideology that then, flows, it trickles down, to quote Comrade Reagan, it trickles down into the masses through the media, the NGOs, and other institutions. But so I can't imagine the case being that they're actually teaching media literacy, critical thinking, and how to spot fake news, because that would mean how do you spot all of the mainstream media news and basically everything that the media is telling you.
I think what Starbuck's saying is they're teaching media literacy classes that teach people to see shows like ours and shut their brain.
Oh, hopefully.
And recognize fake news.